I was going to finish him. My pulse was hammering so hard I could feel it in my wrists. I opened my mouth to win an argument and heard myself speak a Bible verse I had never read. Because you need to understand who I was. I am 67 years old, and when I was 24, standing in a university cafeteria on a Tuesday afternoon, I opened my mouth to win an argument and heard myself speak a Bible verse I had never read. Not paraphrased, not guessed, word for word, complete, like someone had placed it on my tongue the way you place a coin in a child's hand. I had never owned a Bible. I had never sat in a church pew by choice, and yet that verse came out of me whole, fluent, and uninvited, as if my mouth no longer belonged to me. I need to take you back before that moment, though, because you need to understand who I was. You need to understand the kind of man who walked into that cafeteria. Otherwise, what happened won't land the way it should. I grew up in a house where Christianity was something you performed on Sundays and ignored the rest of the week. My father could quote scripture at the dinner table and then disappear for 3 days without a word. My aunts sat in the front pew every week, sang loud enough for the whole congregation to hear, and then spent the car ride home tearing apart every person they'd just worshipped beside. I watched this for years. I cataloged it. By the time I was 15, I had already decided that faith was a costume people wore to hide the fact that they were no different from anyone else. Maybe worse, because at least everyone else wasn't pretending. By college, I had turned that conclusion into a weapon. I studied philosophy. I read Nietzsche and Hitchens and Russell, not because I loved truth, but because I loved winning. I loved the look on a believer's face when I cornered them with a contradiction they couldn't answer. I collected logical inconsistencies in theology, the way other students collected records or posters. I could dismantle someone's faith in under 5 minutes, and I took pride in that. Real pride. The kind that sits in your chest and makes you feel 10 feet tall. I was the smartest person in every room. At least that's what I told myself. My friends thought I was confident, fearless even. They didn't see what happened at 3 in the morning when the apartment was quiet and the arguments were over, and there was nothing left to win. They didn't see me sitting on the edge of my bed with a glass of bourbon staring at the wall, feeling a kind of emptiness I didn't have a name for. I called it independence. I called it clarity. I called it freedom. But freedom isn't supposed to feel like a locked room you can't get out of. Freedom isn't supposed to hum with that low, constant static of something missing. I drank to quiet it. Not dramatically. Not falling down drunk. Just enough to blur the edges. Enough to keep the silence from getting too loud. I kept people at arm's length and called it self-sufficiency. I hadn't spoken to my mother in 2 years. I told myself she was the problem. I told myself a lot of things. Now, the cafeteria. It was late afternoon, maybe 4 o'clock. That strange hour when the lunch crowd is gone and the dinner crowd hasn't arrived yet, and the whole room feels like it's holding its breath. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, that low electrical hum you stop noticing until everything else goes quiet. There were maybe a dozen people scattered across the room, trays half cleared, the smell of old coffee and industrial cleaning solution. I was sitting across from a guy named Marcus, a believer, quiet, gentle in a way that irritated me, because I couldn't find the crack in it. Most Christians I argued with got flustered, defensive, emotional. Marcus just listened. He nodded. He didn't raise his voice. And that calm patience of his drove me absolutely insane, because I couldn't rattle him. And if I couldn't rattle him, I couldn't win. That day I was leaning forward across the table, my voice sharp, building what I thought was an airtight, logical trap. I was mid-sentence. I remember the feel of the plastic table edge pressing into my forearms. I remember the slight condensation on my water bottle. I was in complete control. Every word calculated, every pause deliberate. I was going to finish him. And then something shifted. It started in my chest. Not pain, pressure. Like a hand pressing gently but firmly against the inside of my sternum. Not pushing me backward, just making itself known. I remember my breath catching slightly, just a half-second hitch that I tried to cover with another sentence. But the sentence that came out was not the one I had planned. My mouth kept moving, the words kept coming, but they were not my words. I heard myself recite a verse, complete and precise, with the cadence of someone who had read it 100 times, chapter and book and number and all. And I knew, even as I was saying it, that I had never seen that verse, never heard it quoted, never encountered it in any of the books I had read to arm myself against belief. It arrived whole, the way a song arrives when you didn't know you were humming. The cafeteria noise seemed to pull away from us, like someone had turned the volume down on everything except my voice and the buzzing lights above. Marcus's eyes went wide, not with triumph, not with the satisfaction I would have expected, with something closer to awe. Like he was witnessing something he hadn't caused and couldn't explain either. I stopped. My throat tightened. My hands went cold. I remember looking down at them, at my fingers against the white table, and feeling suddenly exposed. Not embarrassed, exposed. Like every wall I had ever built, every argument, every smirk, every rehearsed dismissal, had been quietly removed while I wasn't looking. And now I was just sitting there without armor, without defense, without a single clever thing left to say. The silence between us expanded. It filled the table, the chairs, the space between our eyes. Marcus didn't say a word. He didn't need to. Whatever had just happened, we both knew it hadn't come from me. I grabbed my bag. I stood up fast. My pulse was hammering so hard I could feel it in my wrists. I walked away without saying goodbye, without looking back, my legs moving faster than they needed to because I needed distance. I needed air. I needed to be somewhere that thing couldn't reach me. I made it maybe 30 feet before I passed another table. And on that table, sitting alone on the beige plastic surface like someone had placed it there for me, was a small pocket New Testament. Burgundy cover, creased and worn, pages slightly fanned open as if a breeze had moved through them. Except there was no breeze. I picked it up, not gently, not reverently. I picked it up the way you pick up a piece of evidence you're about to use against someone. I was going to find a contradiction, a flaw, something to anchor myself back into the person I had been 5 minutes ago. I flipped through the pages fast, almost frantically, my fingers clumsy with adrenaline. And then I stopped, because there it was, The exact verse, the exact words that had come out of my mouth minutes earlier, underlined in faded pencil by a stranger's hand, waiting in a book I had never opened, on a table I had never sat at, left behind by someone I would never meet. My legs gave slightly. I sat down, not dramatically, not falling, just slowly lowering myself into the chair, because standing didn't feel possible anymore. I held that small book in both hands and stared at the underlined words and felt something I had never felt before. Not fear, not excitement. Surrender. Quiet, total, involuntary surrender. Like breath leaving a body at the end of a long day. Like finally setting down something so heavy you had forgotten you were carrying it. I closed the book. I pressed it against my chest. And for the first time in years, I had no argument, no rebuttal, no clever response. Nothing. I didn't become a different person that night. I want to be honest about that. I went back to my dorm room and sat on my bed and stared at that little burgundy book for a long time without opening it. I didn't pray. I didn't cry. I just sat with the weight of what had happened and tried to make it fit inside a life that suddenly felt too small for it. But things changed. Slowly. Not in dramatic flashes, but in quiet shifts that I almost didn't notice until I looked back later. I stopped picking fights with believers. Not because I had lost. Because the hunger to attack had been replaced by a different hunger. One I didn't have a name for yet. A hunger to understand. To sit with the words instead of against them. I started reading that pocket New Testament alone in my room at night. No commentary, no agenda. Just reading, the way you listen to someone who finally has your attention. The drinking slowed. Then it stopped. Not through willpower or discipline. The appetite for numbness just faded, like a sound moving further and further away until you realize it's gone. I called my mother. The conversation lasted maybe 4 minutes. It was awkward and halting, and neither of us knew what to say. But it was real. It was the first real thing I had offered another person in longer than I could remember. The guilt I had carried for years, guilt I didn't even know I was carrying, started loosening. Not because I earned something, not because I checked the right boxes, because I finally stopped arguing against the possibility that I could be forgiven. I stopped slamming the door on something that had been knocking long before I was willing to hear it. That little burgundy book stayed in my jacket pocket for years. The cover got soft from handling. The pages got thin at the edges. It wasn't a trophy. It was evidence. Proof that something reached me before I reached for it. Proof that the encounter happened before I ever touched that book. I'm 67 now. I've had decades to think about what happened in that cafeteria. I've had plenty of time to rationalize it, to explain it away, to chalk it up to coincidence or subconscious memory or stress. I've tried. Believe me, I've tried. None of it holds. The words that came out of my mouth that day did not come from me. And the book that confirmed them was waiting before I knew I needed it. So if you're listening to this and you've been sensing something you keep pushing aside, a thought that comes back when you're alone, a pressure in your chest you can't explain, a moment where everything you were sure about suddenly flickered, just for a second, just enough to make you uncomfortable. Don't ignore it. I'm not telling you what to believe. I'm not going to stand here and preach at you the way people preached at me. I hated that. I still understand hating that, but I'm telling you that I was the last person on earth who should have been reached. I was armed. I was hostile. I was certain of my own superiority. And still, something found me. Mid-sentence, mid-argument, mid-pride. It did not ask my permission. It did not wait for me to be ready. And whatever is reaching for you right now, it might not be waiting for your permission either.